The pathway of inflation in 2018. Discuss.
I think it's going to continue to disappoint. I mean, you've got a lot of structural factors in the world in terms of technology and automation and gig economy, call it what you want, which are going to continue to bear down. So the Phillips curve is probably still a bit flatter. We think we won't see the dots. We think we'll only get 2 rate rises next year. Because you've also got to remember there's a lot of balance sheet shrinkage going on here. So I think by the back end of the year, we might see the balance sheet start doing some of the work against a backdrop of disappointing inflation.
How does the bond market react to the balance sheet shrinkage? I mean, that's in your sort of field of thought, isn't it, Iain? We know what happened under QE. When you reverse it, will it be as swimmingly? Will it be as orderly as many have assumed?
I think that's the big question for 2018, because at the moment the market is taking it in its stride. Obviously, the Fed has started a reduction. The ECB are like, oh, they are going to be cutting back their purchases in January. But I think towards the end of Q1, maybe Q2, the market's going to spend a lot more time focusing on it, because by our calculations, somewhere within the third quarter, we're going to see this flip. And it's when central banks have been pumping money into the system for the last decade or so. From about the third quarter, they're going to be removing it. It's going to be slow, to start with, very gradual, but it's going to be a real change in rhetoric. And how is the market going to deal with that? And it might have a negative impact, not just on the bond market, but all asset prices.
Does the yield curve invert? As we know, it's predicted the yield curve, the last is 7 recessions. If it does invert, will it predict the 8th recession?
I think it's going to invert. I'm not necessarily sure it predicts a recession. Actually, if I look back to 2005, this sort of level on 2s, 10s, we got to in about April of 2005. It wasn't until December of that year we hit 0. We didn't technically go into a recession until the end of 2007, so a couple of years later. So I feel we've got a few years to run, even if it does go to inversion.
What's your view about the yield curve and what it projects, Simon?
The previous points where the yield curve inverts was against a backdrop where the risk-free natural interest rate was probably about 3%.
Yeah.
Probably think it's about 1. We ought to get used to a bit more yield curve inversion going forward if the natural interest rate is going to be 1% real from here on in. So I'd be a little bit cautious. But clearly, I mean, it's understandably exciting investors right now.